when we began our migrations, we came up into this world from the world below. The Creator telling the people that there are certain places that you're to live and giving them signs of recognition to where these sites are to be found. The migrations began over probably a period of centuries, always looking for that place that was to be the center of our world.
In this land of extremes, the relentless sun soars temperatures to 110 degrees, parching the earth and quieting all life. 6 months later, frigid winds drop temperatures well below zero, in a canyon offering little shelter. And yet here, ancient people chose to construct the center of their world. Buildings of over 700 rooms, originally reaching 4 stories high. And on top of this tower of stone, they marked, with a dagger of light, their knowledge of the sky, a knowledge they would use to guide their construction of a center of cosmology, taking 250 years to complete. The place is a remote canyon in the American Southwest called Chaco. 1,000 years ago, the heart of an ancient Pueblo Indian civilization. These grand buildings have posed a profound mystery for over 100 years of archaeological studies. Why were they built here in this unforgiving place? What was the purpose of their dark, enclosed rooms? And of an arrow straight road to the north? And why, after building these majestic structures, did people deliberately seal them and leave? Recent discoveries reveal an intricate astronomical system here. Clues to Chaco have been held over the centuries in these walls and in the oral histories carried by the descendant people, the Pueblo Indians of today.
In our history, they talk of things that occurred a long time ago, of people who had enormous amount of power, spiritual power and power over people. I think those types of people lived here in Chaco.
It's a mystery what attracted people to this spare land. In 850 AD, the arid soil in Chaco Canyon supported only small clusters of subsistence farmers. Traces of their modest earth-sheltered dwellings have all but disappeared, leaving no hint of what was to come. Over the next 2.5 centuries, 10 massive buildings were constructed here, built 4 to 5 stories high and containing 3,000 rooms. At the center, the structure known as Pueblo Bonito grew to cover 3 acres, a space that suggests the grandeur of one of the great public buildings of the world. At its completion, Pueblo Bonito was the size of the Roman Colosseum. 12 generations of people devoted themselves to building these elaborate structures under nearly impossible conditions. Food would not grow easily in the canyon, and water was scarce. Building materials had to be transported from distant sites. To craft their exquisite walls, the Chacoan masons cut and hauled thousands of tons of sandstone from the mesa tops above. To raise their buildings to 4 stories, they obtained massive timbers from distant mountains. They transported 220,000 timbers by foot across 50 to 70 miles into the canyon. And all this in a place so barren, it's thought that much of the food to support the thousands of builders had to be imported. The Chacoans crafted elegant pottery and ceremonial objects of inlaid turquoise. The raw materials for these efforts were also brought from distant sites. In these challenging conditions, the Chacoan culture flourished across a vast region. They built communities and roads throughout 95,000 square miles of the American Southwest. They traded with cultures 2,000 to 3,000 miles to the south. Objects of Mesoamerican origin, including parrots and plumed serpents, were found in the buildings of Chaco. To most archaeologists, the impractical choice of building here has been explained by the theory that it was a trade center, collecting and redistributing goods from a 35,000 square mile area. Over 200 miles of ancient, well-engineered roads connected with the Chaco buildings. A theoretical picture was drawn of Chaco, of roads busy with traders and a thriving populace of workers and families, filling the 3,000 rooms of the large buildings with as many as 10,000 people. But recently, doubts have been cast on this view of Chaco. Archaeologist John Stein.
I had grown up in a traditional archaeological situation. We were told that these were the homes of ancestral Pueblo people. Even at that time, there was a hint that something was amiss in terms of what we thought was going on here. There was a foreboding character about it. So it's built at a bigger than human scale. It's designed to overwhelm you. And I think, even as ruins, I think they do that. My opinion is that what it really is a theatrical exercise.
The visual impact of the original buildings has also intrigued archaeologist Mike Marshall.
Buildings were often placed in positions to magnify them. They would be put up on the side of a hill, and they would overlook an area. They often even incorporated false front architecture. A cliff would come along, and instead of having space in back of it, they put a wall in front of the cliff, and it was a fake wall. It was just a cliff. And they'd use this thing to magnify the building. Rigid formality is also one of the principal characteristics of Chacoan buildings. This replication over and over again of these similar patterns. The whole complex gave this massive terraced appearance that really was built more to present an exterior form and dominance than it was to enclose. And this reminds us a good deal of, say, pyramids in Mexico.
Many researchers have wondered if the astounding development of Chaco was triggered by the influence of Mesoamerican culture. Perhaps in stories brought by traders or directly through the influx of powerful people from the south. But the evidence is inconclusive. Nothing quite like Chaco existed before or since. A computer model of the building called Chetrocetl shows the vast interior space that was sectioned into over 600 rooms. Rooms that were for the most part closed off from the plaza and from the outside and each other. What we see as rooms in Chaco buildings may be in fact just blocks of enclosed space, building blocks designed to support monumental exteriors.
Their rooms are way down inside these things. The access to them would be terrible. There's no ventilation to speak of. I mean, you build a fire in there, it'd kill you. In fact, people have tried it. It doesn't work.
Deep insulated space, dark, dark interiors, with little evidence of human occupation.
Excavations have revealed very few hearths in the buildings, and only a few hundred burials were ever found in the whole canyon. And the large mounds near the buildings, once assumed to hold household refuse, are now yielding another surprise.
Probably people were not living in the building.
Geologist Rich Friedman has studied these mounds using infrared aerial photography. In infrared images, areas that have a high concentration of organic material appear dark.
And the mound, you can see it's actually lighter. The soil or the dirt there is a different composition, and what I derive from that is that it does not have the same charcoal content and organic content, which means that it's not household refuse. Obviously, there was not as much cooking activity going on in this larger building, and in order to survive, the inhabitants would have had to have cooked. If those buildings were lived in continuously, you would expect a trash mound out in front that would be approximately twice the size of the building itself.
Immense buildings not intended for residential use. What could have been their purpose here in this barren canyon? The Chacoans had no written language, and therefore no written record was left to offer clues.
Well, we don't have codices, we don't have tablets and books. There is a language in the architecture. There is a language in the roads and in the light markings, and it's an opening for us to understand the minds of the people here.
Anna Sofer has studied Chaco Canyon since 1977. It was in that year that she made a discovery revealing a profound knowledge at work here. Her career as an artist had led her to an interest in ancient rock art. She came here with a group of volunteers to record rock carvings on the canyon walls. During a climb to the top of Fajada Butte, she found, behind 3 great slabs of sandstone, a large spiral carving. She came to it just as a dagger of sunlight pierced its center.
If I had come 3 minutes later, it wouldn't have had that strength of image. And it was so vivid. And it was just a week from solstice and very close to noon. So I figured it had to be marking the highest point of the sun both in the year and the day.
The light marking is created by rays of the sun channeled through the openings between the rocks. Returning to the site many times, Anna recorded the play of light between the slabs and the spiral. She found that the rocks in the art brilliantly captured the sun cycle. This could be no accident. The equinox days, midpoints in the sun's year, are also marked by incorporating a smaller spiral. At these times, once in spring and once in fall, a second dagger appears to pierce the smaller spiral. And in the dead of winter, on the shortest day of the year, 2 daggers descend to perfectly bracket the spiral. This calendar is unique. No other ancient astronomers are known to have devised such a complex timepiece of shadow and light. After her discovery, Anna would be drawn over the next 20 years into a study of Chaco sites. She formed an interdisciplinary group called the Solstice Project to do this work. They would find that the marking of specific moments in the sun cycle was obsessively repeated on the butte.
equinox at noon is like fireworks on Fajada Butte. High up on the east side, a snake has a shadow along the body. And on the west side is a beautiful double spiral, and a spear of light bisects the right lobe of the double spiral. So the moment of noon equinox is multiply marked. So we kind of have to ask, what is this time? Well, it's the middle of the sun's passage through the year, because noon, of course, is the middle of the day, and equinox is the middle of the year between the solstices. So it's the middle of time. And then you have to ask, well, is that also expressed in Chaco in other ways? I wondered if this fascination by the Chacoans with the sun was also expressed in their buildings. And I found one clue in a petroglyph on Fajada Butte. It was so small it nearly escaped my notice. But very near the Sundagger site, this petroglyph showed the half circle of Pueblo Bonito. And with an arrow along the midwall of the building, pointing to the south and to the above, to the sun just at noon, where we had seen it marked on Fajada. A Hopi man told me that that small petroglyph was more important than the building itself. And I began to wonder if Bonito was built as a symbol in relationship to the sun. I decided that we should survey these walls and the prominent walls of all the Chaco buildings.
Philip Tualitz Tiwa is a Hopi Indian. As Deputy Director of the National Geodetic Survey, he joined the Solstice Project team after hearing Anna speak about the possibility of an astronomical significance in the Chacoan buildings.
My business was making precise surveys. I wanted to help prove or disprove, if possible, some of the findings that they had found. If what she was proposing was true, then I thought this was incredibly important. And that goes back to the value it has to Indian people that their ancestors were scientists. They were close observers of nature, and this happened 1,000 or almost 1,000 years ago.
With the expert help of the National Geodetic Survey, the team is able to determine exact orientation of the buildings. The 14 largest Chacoan buildings will be surveyed. 4 outside the canyon, up to 65 miles distant. 5 located in or near the 8-mile-long canyon. And 5 others in a central complex near Pueblo Bonito. At Pueblo Bonito, the survey reveals that the 2 long straight walls are exactly north-south and east-west, directions that have a special connection with the sun. As the morning sun arcs over the building, the shadow of the midwall recedes until just at noon, when it disappears.
It's no accident that the shadow disappears into the wall just at noon, because this wall is exactly north-south, dividing Pueblo Bonito. And when we see the petroglyph on Fajada Butte, where it's representing the building and this wall as the shaft of the arrow, we see that that arrow is pointing to the sun just in the middle of its journey each day.
The long east-west wall of Bonito also has a relationship to the sun, to its journey through the seasons. The rising sun position shifts constantly through the year, but the sun rises exactly in line with this wall only on the 2 equinox days, midpoints between the extreme summer and winter at Chaco. And only on these days the sun sets along this wall. The wall also exactly divides the nighttime from the daytime, because at equinox the sun disappears through the night for exactly the same length of time that it shines through the day. Day and night are equal only at these times of the year, when Pueblo Bonito is aligned to the sun's rise and set. Through the spring and summer months, the sun rises and sets north of this wall, the furthest north at summer solstice. And through the fall and winter months, it rises south of this wall, furthest south at winter solstice. Pueblo Bonito's east-west wall exactly divides the seasons of the year and the day from the night, just the way its midwall divides the day's time, morning from afternoon.
The fact that these mammoth buildings were also engineered, it would appear, and designed to incorporate those cycles was so striking. Like the small markings on Fajada, Pueblo Bonito was marking on a large scale the middle of time. At the center of Chaco Canyon, the middle place of their culture. And we were soon to find that the Chacoan architects had used these same midpoints of the sun to guide their planning for the whole central complex.
In addition to Pueblo Bonito, 3 other buildings displayed a similar relationship to the sun: Ungopavi, Sincletzin, and Pueblo Alto. And the team went on to find that 4 buildings are also positioned in a larger pattern on lines to the sun. All are aligned to the sun at noon and equinox.
Standing here in the center of Pueblo Bonito, on the first day of fall or the first day of spring, the sun would be rising directly in line with the center of Quetzalcoatl. We find that if you follow the line of one building to the sun, you come to another building. The same thing we discovered at Pueblo Alto. Here at the highest of the Chaco buildings, like the midwall of Pueblo Bonito, the sidewalls are aligned to the noon sun. Siding along these walls, you come to another solar-aligned building, Sincletzin, across the canyon. And when we look back from Sincletzin, directly north along its perpendicular, we see Pueblo Alto.
The noon sun alignment that connects Sincletzin and Pueblo Alto precisely bisects the space between Quetzalcoatl and Pueblo Bonito. Why did the Chacoans go to such lengths to mirror the sun in perfect symmetric patterning of their central complex?
As these people would view the heavens, there was an order of things up there. What you had here, of course, contrasted to that. Some years it was too dry, too hot, too windy, too cold. If there was a way to transfer the orderly nature of the cosmos down onto what seems to be chaos that exists here, then you begin to then integrate at this place both heaven and earth. And this would be, of course, viewed, at least typically in Pueblo culture, as a center place.
We look upon Chaco Canyon, especially Pueblo Bonito, as a place where people of great power lived at one time. Like Aquepitzuliagwe, meaning the people who live in the circular house were people that had magical powers, power over animals and birds and so forth.
The knowledge held at Chaco had a profound influence over the region. Though relatively few people lived here, there is evidence that huge numbers came to the canyon to erect the buildings and to participate in ceremonies. Insight into these ceremonies may rest here, on the mesa above Pueblo Bonito, in this very large mound. As predicted by the infrared imaging, there's no evidence of household refuse. Instead, excavations show that thousands of pots were intentionally shattered here over half a century until the mound reached the height of a small Chaco building. In Pueblo tradition, the deliberate breaking of a pot is an offering.
In the process of destroying an object, whether it be pottery, basket, or clothing or whatever, you send it into the afterworld because you make it unusable for the living. And so they were both for gifts to the dead and gifts for purification, that pottery was broken.
Archaeologists have determined that this large-scale ceremonial breakage of pots occurred only at certain times of the year. It is thought now that people came to the canyon periodically, possibly timed to celestial cycles. Some people would have come as far as 200 miles from their outlying communities, crossing vast stretches of barren land. Coming upon the canyon, they would have seen within it the towering structures and entered the dark enclosures of their great stone walls. Possibly stepping down into one of the covered chambers embedded in the buildings, circular structures called kivas. For centuries, kivas have been the centers of ceremonial life of the Pueblo people, where, continuing to this day, complex rituals occur, ordered and timed to the solar cycle. We do not know the nature of the ceremonies here, but the great number and size of the kivas suggest that the scale was immense. There are 15 great kivas, and each of these could hold over 400 people. There are over 100 small kivas, and in each of these 50 to 100 people could gather. Many thousands of people may have worshipped here at a time. Here at the great kiva Casa Rinconada, every feature is organized in relationship to the sky. The south doorway is to the sun at noon. The north doorway is to the North Star. The large timbers supporting the roof are located north-south and east-west of each other. The building was originally covered with a massive roof of wood beams and soil. In the dark interior of the kiva, the movement of the sun would not be directly seen. And yet the kiva's symmetric design of the sun and the stars must have been known to the people participating here in ceremony. While its alignments are symbolically directed to the invisible sun above, its round, insulating walls contain a darkness connecting with the earth. The structure embeds relationships to the motions of the sky and to the earth that people inside the kiva must have held in their minds. The placement of the doorways in most of the Chaco kivas is to the north, to the night sky. North is where the sun is absent, where the shadows fall, where the stars circle the pole star. Clearly, the Chacoans commemorated the sun with great care in their architecture. But solar alignments were found by the Solstice Project in only 4 of the large buildings. Anna and Phil faced a puzzle. With such meticulous planning and evidence, it seemed unlikely that the other buildings had no place in the scheme. The moon in Chaco is vivid and bright. And like the sun, its shadows and positions on the horizon could be observed over the years.
These people would have been as aware of the night heavens as they would have been the cycle of the sun. If you align a building to some aspect of the sun, why wouldn't you, if you have knowledge of the lunar cycle, why wouldn't you orient that to some aspect of the moon?
But the moon is more elusive. The Hopi call it the foolish man who runs around with no home. Today, very few people are aware of the moon's long, complex cycle. There are the monthly phase changes, and like the sun, the rising and setting positions of the moon are constantly shifting on the horizon, from north to south. Only observers carefully tracking the moon over many years would experience its complete cycle. The full moon occurring at midwinter rises and sets farthest north in the year. But if you track the same midwinter full moon over 9 1/4 years, it would rise and set farther and farther north. And then it would travel south over 9 1/4 years to complete an 18.5-year cycle. The far points in this cycle are called the minimum and maximum extremes. It would take generations of people to track and mark this long cycle, and this information would have little practical value to the Chacoans.
I thought it would be highly unlikely that we would find that the Chacoans aligned their buildings to this long cycle of the moon. And if we found that, it would be the only culture known in the world to align their buildings to the moon's cycle. But we did find evidence that they had that knowledge on Fajada Butte. Here, by tracking the moon's shadow on the spiral just where the sun was marked, they could observe its long cycle.
When the moon reaches its minimum extreme, once in 18.5 years, its shadow falls in the center of the spiral, just where the sun's light dagger pierces the spiral at summer solstice. And 9 1/4 years later, when the moon reaches its maximum extreme, its shadow falls in the outer edge of the spiral, just where one of the sun's daggers falls at winter solstice. Year by year, the shadow cast on the spiral by the winter full moon crosses the 9 1/2 turns of the spiral, as the moon travels from minimum to maximum extremes over 9 1/4 years. The correspondence of the number of spiral turns and the years in the cycle is intriguing. The maximum extreme moon casts a shadow on the outer edge, and the minimum moon casts its shadow along the center of the spiral. The project discovered that 7 buildings are aligned to the rising and setting positions of the maximum and minimum extreme moons, the same moons that are marked on the spiral. Alignment schemes vary among the buildings. Each building provides a distinct stage for viewing the moon's drama. The Chacoans would see the extreme moons rise or set in line with a perpendicular across the building's plaza. Or they would see the moon rise and set along a building's long back wall. Pueblo Pintado is located 15 miles from the canyon. According to the survey, the winter full moon will rise in alignment with its long wall once in 18.5 years. Tonight, Anna and Bill Stone of the National Geodetic Survey will see if their findings are confirmed.
And there it comes. I can
Oh,
see
you do
it
see
now.
it?
It is
oh
quite
my God,
pale.
It's rather large.
It's very large on the horizon.
Wow.
Yeah.
It is December 1997, the night preceding the full moon that occurs closest to winter solstice. And it is the year when the full moon is at its minimum extreme.
The measurements here with the compass do agree to within a fraction of a degree from the survey that was done on the alignment of this wall.
But you know, tomorrow night we'll really have a chance to test our data when we're in the canyon, and we'll see the full moon rise from the large buildings.
On the following day, Connie Garcia of Acoma Pueblo has come to the canyon to observe the full moon with Anna.
You thinking you're talking about my class? About a half hour after the sun sets, we'll see that moon rise right along that wall, right about here. We'll see it rising up.
The team will document the moon's rise with time-lapse photography.
What we're seeing now is something that was seen centuries ago by people who, you know, my people came from, are descendant from. And it's just, I feel like I'm connected to a more primal time. It's hard to believe that people who didn't have sophisticated equipment like we do these days could actually plot something like that.
Only after generations of study and surveying of the moon could the Chacoans align their massive buildings so perfectly to its extreme positions. And what is even more amazing, and typical of the Chacoans, is that there is a symmetry to it. This moon not only rises in alignment, but it also sets in alignment with the walls of a building across the canyon, Pueblo del Arroyo. And 6 months later, the Chacoans would see the midsummer full moon rise in the doorways of Del Arroyo and in line with its prominent walls. This moon then traverses the canyon floor, now burnished by the summer sun. It fills the plaza of Pueblo Bonito with its light. And then, as though completing its cycle, it sets in line with Chacoan.
This is where things seemed really extravagant, because here I realized if I followed the line of this back wall of Chacoan to the moon, I'd be going across 12 miles and through a mesa that blocked the view. But I would come to another building, Quinbaniola, right on that line to the moon. I wondered if this was a coincidence, or had the Chacoans aligned their lunar buildings to each other the way they had their solar buildings. Then we found more evidence. Here at Quincletso, in the Central Canyon, there's a relationship to a building 15 miles away.
The walls of Quincletso are aligned to the rising of this same minimum moon. And here, too, the view is blocked by a mesa. Following a line from this building and from Del Arroyo towards that rising moon, and traveling a distance of 15 miles over a desolate area with no other buildings, we leave the Central Canyon, pass through mesa walls, and eventually the alignment to this moon passes directly through another building, Pueblo Pintado. Pueblo Pintado and Quinbaniola are related on these lunar lines to the central complex, even though they're located far from the canyon. A line to the maximum moonrise connects two other buildings in a similar way, located out of sight of each other, but perfectly aligned. This line is exactly bisected by the solar axis of the central complex. From no one building, and at no one time, would a person see this pattern. It's as though this intricate symmetry of relationships to the sky and the earth was drawn on the landscape, but only to be held in the minds of the people.
What's so striking, I think, in Chaco is it's the intuition working with the natural environment, but there's such intelligence at the same time and such planning. 12 generations of people dedicated themselves to achieving this abstract pattern. It's as though the pattern itself had such intrinsic value to them that, without writing, in itself it had the power to direct their activities over 250 years.
We've never found an architect's plan of any sort, nor do we need to. If in the oral tradition, and I'm guessing in the ceremonial, literally in the spiritual ceremonial systems, there was the inherent instruction on how to lay out according to cosmological requirements. You don't have to write that. As you walk through any of these sites, you're in the midst of a thought process that worked simultaneously with the aesthetic, the pragmatic, the scientific, the mystical, in planning the use of space.
You almost had a communal spirit, a communal intelligence. You know, people so organized that you were all working together and you were all believing in the same themes, and you all worked artistly, to build around you, and the prayers that you said, were all one and the same.
I think a lot of Chacoan ceremonial architecture was built to be used to reactualize mythic events. Pilgrims all over the world, that's why they go to these sacred spots. They go there to get in contact with the power of the ancient power of the events and the miraculous associations of those places. And so, in many cases, Chacoan structures were built for the purpose of being able to use those roads, buildings, and sacred places to get in touch with ancient mythic events.
We stand here right at the foot of one of those roads, the incredible roads that go north, and north in our belief too is just the way it leads back to where we came from. We speak of coming from the north and emerging from that place too.
On the steep cliffs behind Pueblo Bonito and Chaco, stairways and rampways climb the mesa and connect with roads. At Pueblo Alto, these roads converge in the Great North Road. The Chacoan roads, seen here as depressions in the landscape, are consistently 30 feet wide as our modern two-lane roads, and remarkably straight for great distances. Their elaborate construction suggested a practical function.
What struck us from the beginning of our study of the North Road is that it is overbuilt and underused. There are no communities along this road, and there are no resources.
And that orientation along a essentially north axis has no logical reason. There's no endpoint. There's no major buildings at the end of that road. And as a result of that, a number of us came to the conclusion that the road itself was a directional corridor, that it was constructed, the intent of the construction of the road was to build it to the north.
The North Road is best seen from the air. To retrace the route of this astronomically aligned road, Anna enlisted the help of Adriel Heisey, an ultralight pilot and noted photographer.
The road goes up the cliffs, out of the central buildings. Then just north of Pueblo Alto, it heads across empty desert country with no buildings. And yet it's so elaborate. In sections, we documented double routes over 15 miles, each 30 feet wide. This corridor heads north for 35 miles across monotonous, empty terrain. And then suddenly drops down the steepest edge of the Badlands Canyon. When we explored the slope where the road drops, we found the remains of an old stairway and many fragments of broken pots, as though people might be commemorating the end of this road to the north through a ceremonial breakage of pots.
To the north is where our point of origin begins, the point where we came into this world. In essence, that north line, that north road, connects us back to the Creator.
Trails and roads are an important concept that are used even today with our afterworld and our present world as being tied together by the barefoot trail, the barefoot road. The Badlands going to the north may have been an area where the spirit went when the Chaco Canyon person died. There's a concept that the afterworld is a perfect reflection of the present world.
For the Chacoans, could the North Road have been a connection of the world below with the above? Or the north with the south? Of the dark with the light? Reversing direction on the road and following it to the south, it climbs to the rim of the Badlands Canyon, to the light, and runs across the desert to the south, to the sun. It joins the solar axis of the central complex around which the sun and the moon revolve. And it joins there the mid-wall of Pueblo Bonito, which is directed by the arrow to the above, to the noon sun. Here in Chaco, it's as though the north and the south, the worlds of the below and the above, are joined with the cycles of the sun and the moon in this sacred center.
I find it fascinating that people came to this place because the land was so compelling and because the formations of the sun and the moon just drew them into such a fantastic order of themselves in relationship to the universe. And what could be more beautiful? The whole land here was used. And any construction by these ancient people was related to the earth and the sky. And it's very exciting, it's very compelling to be in the middle of a situation where it's as though everything is playing itself out to you in a program, in a pattern.
We may never know if the Chacoans completed their astronomical pattern. These enigmatic buildings will always hold secrets to themselves, including reasons why people left. Severe droughts occurred in the region in the early 12th century. Archaeologists speculate that famine may have further stressed an already tenuous social hierarchy, perhaps even leading to violent disruptions. And there may have been changes in the Chacoan religious beliefs. Pueblo people hold their history of Chaco's ending.
Here at Chaco, they were very, very powerful people who had a lot of spiritual power. And these people probably used their power in ways that caused things to change. And that may have been one of the reasons why the migrations were set to start again, is because these people were causing changes that were never meant to occur.
After 2.5 centuries, the Chacoan ceased construction. The buildings were carefully sealed.
People began to move out. People sealed up doorways, broke manos and matares as part of the ceremony of going away. Clans moving out. Clan increased, dividing and splitting and moving to different areas.
Before the Chacoans left the canyon, they also burned most of the kivas in the large buildings. The intense heat left these burn marks on the walls. Kivas would burn only if their massive roofs were removed. The effort required to dismantle these structures was almost equal to the enormous effort of building them in the first place.
Certainly their leaving was not very abrupt. You know, they weren't here yesterday and all of a sudden tonight decided to leave tomorrow morning. The migrations were very slow, very calculated.
Perhaps over time, the original premises on which they began to develop these places could have been corrupted. And some people who come here feel that there was an aspect to this place that was perhaps darker.
I think that they were so in tune with the natural forces that they were able to control these forces. And sometimes it's been said that this could be abused by people, and that perhaps that there was decisions made in the past not to continue this accumulation of knowledge, of control of the natural forces. Something like a place like this, everything goes back to the Mother Earth. The houses that you build, you know, the massive stone walls that you construct, everything is meant to fall down and go back to the Mother Earth. We should be left as it is, and this is all just part of the natural way of life.
There's some things in our migration histories that we don't understand. But I think some of those things were never meant to be understood. They served a purpose when they were needed. And now that that purpose is, or that need is no longer there, it's no longer necessary to repeat that portion of that story.
To learn more about the independent film, The Mystery of Chaco Canyon, visit the Indie Scene. Log on to PBS Online at pbs.org.